So if anyone out there is not following Representative Warren Davidson from Ohio, you need to follow him. He is not only a great legislator, he actually is just a great person. He's been a leader in the Bitcoin space for a long time. He had some heterodox ideas about how Bitcoin should be incorporated into sort of the larger fiscal policy, and we saw the result of that this week with the release of Bitcoin for America Act. What the act does, it does two things. It would allow Americans to pay their taxes in Bitcoin. The interesting thing there is it gives the option of actually having those taxes paid in Bitcoin feed into the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is the budget neutral way to accumulate Bitcoin that we've been asked to research by policymakers. It's a great. It not only does that make perfect sense, but it's a great way to attract Bitcoin businesses. If Bitcoiners, there's a lot of capital, a lot of money sitting on the sidelines, a lot of it locked up in hardware wallets, because nobody wants to pay their capital gains taxes if they want to use this. Why not let people pay their taxes in Bitcoin, get that capital circulating, and at the same time build the SPR. So all over, I think that is the sort of that's the new provision in the bill. The second revision, of course, would be codifying the Bitcoin reserve, codifying Treasury's ability to hold it, outlining regulations for accounting for it, custody. All things that are important. If we're gonna, I mean, as Bitcoiners inherently know, security and accountability are key. Right now, because of the nature of digital assets, the coins that are seized in law enforcement actions or whatever are treated the same way like houses and Lamborghinis and Lambos are treated. There needs to be a better way to do it. This bill, in addition to ensuring that Treasury has the statutory ability to hold Bitcoin, would require Treasury to establish a custody procedure and also bring accountability to Congress so we know exactly how much is there. It's a great bill. Great bill.
Zach, you on Twitter last week basically explained for folks like why this is actually a really great piece of legislation, not just for the American government to stack Bitcoin, but for Bitcoiners themselves. So maybe you can go through that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are three main benefits. The first is it codifies the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Executive Order into law. This is sort of the weekly reminder for listeners of the podcast that the SBR did actually happen. I feel like people treat it as like the executive order doesn't count. We need to, but we actually do have a Strategic Bitcoin Reserve under federal law. However, because it was enacted via executive order, a future administration could undo that and sell the Bitcoin. And so one of the things that this act does is to codify that in a way where a future administration can't rug. You would need to pass another law to undo it. Second, and this is the big one, is the uncapped exemption for capital gains for taxes that you pay in Bitcoin. This is, huge out of the gate. It saves people a lot of money on their taxes if they can eliminate what would otherwise be capital gains they would have to realize and reset their cost basis on Bitcoin. I also invite the audience to think through the sort of second and third order implications of this. I think this will be a bonanza for tax lawyers and advisors in terms of the structures you could set up. But I think it's wildly bullish for Bitcoin to get this sort of reset in addition to the benefit of having sort of this funding mechanism for the SBR. But that's sort of like a tangible, direct economic benefit to Bitcoiners who take advantage of this legislation. And then third is the requirement that any Bitcoin paid through this mechanism be held in the SBR for at least 20 years, which is not something that is, enforceable by executive order. But I think there's sort of like a, almost like spiritual component to this where you can pay your tax in Bitcoin. You know that is funding the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, which is, useful for the United States. And although, in some sense, money is, of course, fungible, your tax dollars are going towards that end and maybe not towards other ends that you might disagree with or think are wasteful or immoral.
I think for Bitcoiners, this is it's actually like pretty well received as far as I can tell on Twitter. I think we got some pretty serious positive feedback on this, and I think the reason for that is that there just really are clear tangible benefits to this, which is you pay your taxes in Bitcoin. And then you rebuy, right? To the extent you're not on a full Bitcoin standard, and then that basis gets stepped up. The other thing that crossed my mind is that if you're somebody who owns a portfolio of assets and all of your other assets are, in order to pay capital gains, like let's say you're not holding much cash, you have to pay capital gains on your Apple stock if you want to use that to pay your taxes. Whereas with Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is a part of a larger portfolio, you probably just pay your taxes in Bitcoin, you take no capital gains hit, and then you restack that Bitcoin. So again, I think there's a lot of really positive incentives here for people to basically fund America's strategic Bitcoin reserve. Um, and to hear the community basically say, yeah, this is a proposal that we're excited about. That was very positive.
And there's a fundamental difference, right? You can't pay your taxes with Apple stock. Not yet. Maybe if we go full, you know,
Yeah, that's a good
full
point.
on full on fiscal dominance, we will, but not now. So what this essentially does, I mean, one of the tenets of how a government enforces fiat standard is forcing you to use the money to pay taxes. This is a radical shift. This actually acknowledges Bitcoin as money. If you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin, Bitcoin is money, and that's the federal government acknowledging that it is in fact money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, right? Big week for Bitcoin as everyday money. We had the Square campaign also, no capital gains on Bitcoin for a de minimis exemption. But this would be kind of the real swan signal here, which is, hey, we're going to accept this as tax payment.
Right.
That was the reason a lot of people said, the US dollar has value.
Yeah,
So
you can swap your car for beer, right? You can do anything you want, peer to peer. Can't pay your taxes with that, but once the government accepts this as taxes, it is in fact money.
one question on this, and I'm curious both of your thoughts on this is, I imagine legislators or policymakers objecting to this, particularly on the other, on the Democrat side of the aisle, saying, well, if somebody was, let's say somebody has a $10,000 tax bill, and this is obviously not how the sausage is made, but that those $10,000 go to some government program, right? And now they're getting locked up in the strategic Bitcoin reserve for 20 years. Is that going to be a concern that we hear from folks, that basically whatever money is paid in taxes using Bitcoin would have otherwise been paid in dollars and could be used immediately, whereas now they're basically getting sidelined for 20 years?
I think there are two answers to that. One of which is money is fungible, so no, you can move other money around. And second is, there is some sense in which this is not completely neutral and fungible, which is it is forcing some amount of long-term savings in hard assets by the government in an asset that we don't control or print. And that's part of the idea behind the bill, right? That's why we think the strategic reserve is a good idea, that like maybe we shouldn't spend ad infinitum. We should think about what we spend, and some of our balance sheet maybe should go into a sort of long-term store of value that we think is going to outpace our debt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is
No,
good.
I
I mean,
mean,
people are gonna. I mean, you're gonna hear that, and who knows
yeah.
what once the bill goes through the the process of becoming. Let's hope, knock on wood, if it becomes law, it's gonna go through some changes, and who knows what it looks like. Um, but I agree with what Zach said. Even if it turns out that the Bitcoin is even a portion of it, only a portion of it is saved, it's still the basic tenet that Bitcoin becomes money. Again, I love the idea of the SBR portion of it. I think, but philosophically, like kind of like long term, long march kind of stuff, like the government acknowledging Bitcoin as money. Once you take payment taxes, you're whatever you're paying with is money. I think that's kind of that's not written in the bill, but that's for me like the real philosophical win.
Yeah. No, that's great. Um, okay. So along with the announcement that BPI was endorsing this bill, we launched a quantitative model built with our friend Rohan at bitcoinquant.co. So I'm going to pull that up here and we can go through this a little bit. So first of all, love the way this looks. Rohan did an absolutely fantastic job. We called him up
Super slick, super
on the
slick.
Sunday before we announced this, and we're like, dude, we got to pull this thing together. We need your help. And he worked, day and night. And so basically what this is doing is telling you, on a certain time period, which you can set over here on the left, um, you know, based on a certain amount of taxes paid in Bitcoin, so some certain adoption rate of this, maybe exemption or whatever we want to call it, that will cause some net gain if we, assume a certain CAGR on Bitcoin, right? 20% looking historically. So this number gets pretty crazy the more you play with it. Let's assume like 5% here, over the next 20 years. You know, that's significantly more than our national debt.
For now.
And so for now, right. And so the reality of this is, there's a very significant opportunity cost to this legislation not getting through. This is something BPI has been talking about for a while, but it is interesting to see this, sort of visualized. And so, encouraging folks at home, go play with this. It's at bitcoinquant.co/BPI. You can also find it on our website. But yeah, I think it's just really interesting to play through the different, permutations of this. It also goes historically, so you can take it back in time, all the way to 2020, for example, and you can see the way that it changes that way too. So, yeah, um, really cool tool. Really proud of this for BPI. And hopefully policymakers look at this. We know Warren Davidson was playing around with it, but the numbers are pretty stark.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. government's been selling Bitcoin since probably, I mean, 2012, 2013, right? Think about the money lost. And then I know the most egregious example is Germany sold 55,000 coins last year at like, I don't know, $55,000 a head. I mean, they took literally they could double their money had they sat on it. But again, these are sort of, it's a whole fiat mindset. Like, you liquidate what you get. And then they're not, it's a question of time preference, right? And clearly, like, Western governments right now have proven what side of the time preference argument they're on. We deal with the result. But I think this tool is awesome because it puts it right in front of your face. Like, rethink your time preference. Because maybe not think of yourself and think maybe of your children or your grandchildren and what this will leave for them.
Yeah, my only final thought on this topic, and then we can move on, assuming you all don't have additional thoughts, is also, one thing that Congressman Davidson acknowledged in the interview that he did with BPI, was that this is fully opt-in, right? There's a lot of people who don't want to sell their Bitcoin, and that's a perfectly reasonable position to hold. And this does not mandate that you pay your taxes in Bitcoin. This doesn't mandate that you sell your Bitcoin. This is like in my mind, the most like democratic way to fund the strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? There's a lot of people who say, I don't support the SBR. I don't want my tax dollars being used to, buy Bitcoin. And this is like, fine, if you want to pay your taxes in Bitcoin, that will fund the SBR. If you don't have to. And so I think that's a really kind of beautiful, component of this bill.